Good morning. Welcome to Cory Morgan Show for this last day of May 31st, 2021. Getting into the summer. The weather's fantastic, and so far, so good. It sounds like we might be heading to a reopening finally. A lot of us looking forward to it. A lot of people howling that it's premature. I'm not sure. I guess they do really want us to stay closed in perpetuity, but I'm looking forward to opening, getting out, and having something more akin to a life going on. So I'm just going to start out. That reminder to everybody: we do not take with the Western Standard any government funding, any tax subsidies. We're not asking for it, and I don't think they're really offering it. But all the same, we rely on subscribers, viewers, sponsors, and this is how we can produce this stuff. This is how we can get news out that other outlets aren't covering. And our sponsor for today is the CCFR. That's the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights. And nobody works as hard as the CCFR to fight for your ability to use and own firearms. Make sure to check out what the CCFR is going to do. Go to firearmsrights.ca and check out why join us. And they'll let you know what they're up to, what they're doing, why it's important that you support them, and they're supporting us. It's all comes around, and it's for the better of all of us. So I'm going to start today. I'm going to have Dave Naylor, he's our news editor, come on and talk about what he's working on to kick off the week, what news items are topping the stories these days, and what he's going to be looking forward to as the week progresses. So let's get Dave on here, and there we go. How you doing today, Dave?
It's Monday, Cory. Merry Monday to you.
Thanks. At least it's a nice Monday outside. I see you're in the Western Standard headquarters there.
The world headquarters based in downtown Calgary.
Right on. So maybe just to start things off with a bit of a rundown, what are the top news stories in this last few days, and what are you working on right now?
Oh, I think without a doubt, Cory, it's the horrible discovery of the 215 children's bodies at the residential school in Kamloops. Absolutely horrible. You know, there aren't enough adjectives to describe it. So I think that's obviously the big one. Our British Columbia reporter Reed Small is working on that. Being statements coming around from across the country. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is asking for an emergency debate on it in the House of Commons, and he's probably quite correct that needs to be done. Prime Minister Trudeau has ordered flags across the country on federal buildings to be flown at half-mast. And to me, Cory, there's just so many questions that this story brings up. I mean, when you hear about it, you think of some of these like World War II burial pits. Is that what it is? Are there 215 individual coffins? Is there, just what is going on here? With the record of some residential schools, you got to think that some of these kids either died of mistreatment or even worse. And I think not only are the families of those children deserving an answer, I think all Canadians want to know what the heck's going on. So that'll be the main one, for probably the upcoming week or so, Cory.
Yeah, it's been quite a wake-up call for a lot of people. I mean, we've known about the residential schools. We've heard bits and pieces of the horror stories over decades, but nothing drives it home. I mean, just to get that visual and think about that many unmarked graves of children. I mean, it's just horrifying, and kind of shakes us from our place of comfort, thinking we're in this developed nation where such things would never happen. And clearly they did. It's something else. I'm sure we're going to be hearing a lot more as this unfolds.
Yeah. And I think we also need more details on the timeline where these children's death, in the early 20th century, 1919, for example, did the Spanish flu go through there at that point? Were there more recent deaths? Just a terrible story, Cory.
Yeah, well, and going into other things as we go through this week, I'm sure we'll be talking a lot about the First Nations issues, and again, this horrible history of residential schools. What other news items have we got going on today?
Well, it's obviously be another fun week in politics, as it always seems to be out west here. I just published a story on the Western Standard site on the Ethics Commissioner's investigation of the WE scandal. And as we all know, Prime Minister Trudeau was up to his neck in the WE scandal. But Cory, guess who the Ethics Commissioner never investigated? Yes, you got it. Trudeau himself was never investigated by the Ethics Commissioner in the WE scandal. And Mario Dion said, well, an affidavit is just as good. So he got an affidavit from the Prime Minister telling his side of the story, and that was good enough, apparently. So that's up there now. Alberta Health Minister Tyler Shandro is having a noon press conference, so we'll keep an ear on that. The Calgary municipal election scene is heating up as we get closer to the big August date. So there'll be lots of stuff happening, as there usually is.
Right on. Yeah, that WE scandal just goes on and on. But it's clear. I mean, shouldn't you at least have some testimony or investigation of the guy on top, the one everybody's most concerned about? And it looks like he's gotten a pass on it. But I have to start to wonder, will anything stick to him anyways? It just doesn't seem to matter with Justin Trudeau.
No, and this is, I think the report was called Trudeau 3. The third investigation by the Ethics Commissioner. And Cory, not even blackface sticks to him. So in this day and age, I don't think anything will.
Yeah, I really don't know what it'll take. And so we've got the legislative session is open in Alberta through this week. The reopening's coming. Shandro's got his announcements. I think in a lot of senses, people are, aside from that dire news with the residential schools, people are kind of looking optimistic this week as the summer develops, I think. Yeah.
It is, and Jason Kenney's reopening plan, I'm sure, will be the big topic of debate in the Ledge this week. Hospitalizations are now below 500, Cory. Government sent out a release on that. And if it stays below 500, that means on June 10th, we're likely to move even further ahead into stage 2 of the reopening plan. Stage 1, I guess, goes for most people tomorrow, when they and their closest 3 friends in their household can go out for a beer on a patio. Still, I haven't heard what's happening with golf yet. I've asked the government repeatedly what the golf regulations are going to be, and they don't talk to the Western Standard, so my emails go sadly unanswered. But I think you're right. It's going to be a very nice week of weather. Last I saw, it was going into the 30s on Thursday. I think that'll do a large part in maybe shaking some gloom off people and being more optimistic.
All right, on. I just wanted to check in with you. I guess I'll be seeing you on Wednesday, the day after tomorrow, for the pipeline, and we'll really drill down on the stories for the week. Always appreciate those stories you keep putting out there so prolifically, catching the interest in being on top of things. So I don't want to tear you away from it for too long. So.
No problem, Cory. Anytime. Have a good rest of your show.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for the update, and I'll talk to you later. So, we're kicking off a week, and we've got a number of stories. As somebody else was saying, Teflon Trudeau, hopefully that coating is breaking away soon. It's so much to cover. I'm going to get into the First Nations issue because it's huge. I want to start on something a little light before I go into something dark. Calgary did something that I guess is a move forward in a way, but it's unbelievable the century we're in sometimes when we listen to this. So after much discussion, much debate, and everything else, they have decided now. So it starts tomorrow. You can have a beer in Calgary parks, but it's not as simple as that. They're only actually opening 30 tables, picnic tables, in selected parks in the city right now. And you have to schedule your time to go to these tables, and you can have a couple of beers. It's a maximum 2 hours you can stay at the table. You can only have so many people with you. It's comical. Really? And how much time are they spending on this? Like, this is not reinventing the wheel, or it shouldn't be, how hard, so many countries, so many places, you can go out and have a beer in a park, and particularly Calgary right now. when you go downtown and you see open liquor consumption, meth consumption, heroin consumption, and that's just on the train, and it's true, we've documented it. Yet the city council and city administration tying themselves in knots to try and come up with legislation so law-abiding people can go to the park and sip on a beer, and they've put out this ridiculous, a document on how on these 30 tables people may be able to go into a park and have a beer legally. And listening to some of the parole clutchers, I mean, there were people worked up. There were people contacting City Hall. Oh, you can't let this happen. This will lead to disorder and misery and hellishness. Oh, what is the matter with you people? I mean, for one, we've been drinking in the park for decades. I don't know if you guys didn't notice it. I know I did it in my youth. You just kept it in a paper bag in a cooler. You poured it in a coffee mug. You did whatever you had to. You had beer in those parks. There's a difference between drinking in a park and being drunk in a park. If people say, oh, there's going to be disorder all over. Well, it's still illegal for public intoxication. You still can't go stumbling around bothering people. And then people say, no, the kids will be seeing open drinking. Holy cow, you think they hadn't before? What do you think happened with all those patios we stuck outside that thankfully are opening up tomorrow? People are going to drink beer on them. I don't think it's going to turn every child into an alcoholic. I just find it really odd. We got this supposedly progressive world where they want to let things open up. I mean, we legalized pot. We did a number of things, but they get hung right up on letting somebody have a beer in a park. Why is this a crisis, you guys? Why does it take this much work to just let people consume a legal product in a public place? It's ridiculous. But, it always comes back to control. They can't just open something up and let it be legal. No, we've got to come up with 100 rules, regulations, laws, and probably hire another 20 union bylaw officers to run around and chase people and make sure they didn't stay at their scheduled booked picnic table, one of the 30 in the entire city, for 2 hours and 1 minute, or we'll have to find them. Meanwhile, under the bush, around the corner, 6 people are passed out cold from drinking something other awful substance. I don't know. It's always one step forward, 2 steps back, especially when it comes to regulations. I think they got the right idea. Let us get out and enjoy ourselves a little, but then they got to regulate it to the point where enjoyment actually becomes utterly impossible. Either way, I just wanted to get a quick rant on that one. As Dave was saying, the top issue, everybody's just flat-footed, with this discovery of 250 bodies outside of a Kamloops residential school site, or 215. There's probably more. I worked with GPR actually when I worked in the Arctic. We use it for ice thicknesses. And, it's got limited ability on dry land. It can find some amazing things underground. But if they've documented 215, I suspect there's a number they didn't get out and find. As Dave was saying, too, there's a lot of questions. How did it happen? Why? There's a lot of factors. That school was open for almost 100 years. And you've got a number of children packed into close quarters. The early part of the century, even the last part of the 1800s, they were in there. You're getting things that happen that we don't deal with today. I mean, they wouldn't have had the cleanest of drinking water. They didn't have the best of food. Tuberculosis could sweep through, or smallpox, the Spanish flu. A number of things killed children back then, polio. But that doesn't matter. The thing is, why were these children snatched from their families and stuffed into these schools? That's the horror of the whole thing. It really is. I don't care what the intention was. Some people are saying it was the government had the intention. They wanted to bring up these noble savages and help them integrate with society. So we had to force them in to get rid of their home languages, pull them from their families, and teach them English, teach them reading and writing, and then send them back to an isolated reserve where they live under an Indian agent and prosper somehow. It was bizarre and absurd and wrong, just wrong. We can't make any excuses for this thing. It was wrong. There's no getting around it. It's done. We can't undo it, but we've got to learn from it. And as I was saying to Dave, the thing that was striking is how everybody acts in shock. Well, wait a minute. As I said, we've been talking about residential schools for a long, long time. People have known about it for a long time. And as Dave said, too, it went into recent history. That school was open into the 60s. Residential schools happened until 77. So, I mean, there's some people who are my age, at 50, who actually spent the early part of their life in one of these schools. And let's not beat around the bush. They were abused in those schools. Not always, not by every person, but I mean, to start with, it was an abuse to be torn from your family in the first place and shoved in there. Onwards from that, we know enough to know that there's a lot, unfortunately, of sick, predatory people who get off on abusing children out there. And they put themselves in positions where they can get at them. So you know that those schools drew those sick buggers like flies to come in there. And look at the impunity they got, to the point where they could bury 215 children and never document it. There was no record of this. Why is this a mystery, at least? If these things happened, okay, they passed from a sweeping case of Spanish flu going through there, or smallpox or something. You should still have some records of it. Why these children didn't matter to them enough that there would be some documentation of where you buried them? The families, from what we're hearing reports, all they got was a note, yes, your child has passed. That's it. That's all you needed to know. That's all you heard. It's horrible. And it's modern history, guys, not ancient stuff. And we've messed up, I mean, I keep saying part of the issues that happen now, we've got so much distrust, and you can see where it started. You can see where it formed, generations of it. I mean, what possible way could you make more distrust between different cultures and people than to snatch their children away from them? If anybody's read Uncle Tom's Cabin, I mean, that's a book it's really actually quite, it's been credited to a degree to helping get out in popular chat in the mid 1800s and make people realize the real horrors of slavery, just how evil and sick slavery was, because people wanted to keep their heads buried under the sand. Even back then, they didn't want to think about it. And that book brought it in their face. And the most horrifying part of that book were the stories of how the children of those slaves would be snatched away from their parents. It's the most unimaginable thing for anybody in any culture. Can you imagine how terrifying it is as a child, and then as a parent, and then not get your kid back? And people wonder why First Nations are in as much distress as they are today, as dysfunctional socially and economically as they are today. Who on earth wouldn't be after that? An entire population, an entire culture that went through that. And we've known about this. We buried our heads in the sand 100 years ago on this, and we did lately, and we still are today. And that's where I want to get to on this. Because the problem was race-based policy. The problem was separating and treating people completely different based on their race. And it led to this mess. And the problem now, though, is we're trying to solve it with more race-based policy. We let the solution zing right by our heads. We've realized something went wrong, yet we think we can right it by just changing the application of the original wrongness. So Natives led, they were considered lesser citizens back then. They had policies that kept them, aside from the residential schools, they weren't allowed to leave the reserve without getting permission from the Indian agent on town. That was up until the 60s. They were stuffed into those segregated areas. It's called apartheid. That's what it is. But we haven't gotten rid of the apartheid. We've just tried to turn it around now. So now we've thankfully, Natives have all the same rights as everybody else, First Nations people, but they're still locked in a system of dependence and misery and this differentiation and segregation by race. It's the reserve system, and it's broken, and it's terrible. Why on earth do we think we can take a bunch of people based on race and separate them into these enclaves, these ghettos all over Canada? No matter how much, the solution we've been trying now is pouring more money, more resources into those places. It's fine. You got to pour some money and resources into them. Of course you do. But they're completely dependent. I spent 20 years working in the oil field. A lot of it was working on isolated areas with First Nations people. And I tell you, it's really caused a socioeconomic mess, a disaster. Dependent, and the term I'll use is infantilized the people there. This sense of entitlement And again, it's not a racial thing. It wouldn't matter. You take any race and stick them in that circumstance, they're going to come up, again, dysfunctional and troubled. If you remember a press conference a little while back with a few Native ladies, and they screamed at some reporters because they didn't like the questions that were going on. And really, I'm not trying to say it. I mean, you got to point out what it looked like. It looked like a childish temper tantrum. These were Native leaders from a community, and they had a childish temper tantrum at the podium. But that's because the dependency of this system has turned them into a state of where they are like children. And this is so wrong. And you can get on my case about saying it like that is too damn bad. I've been there. I've seen it. And this is something that we can't just pull away supports either. I'm not one of those people saying just close it all down on the spot. No, that would be a catastrophe. But we've got to stop this path. We've got an ongoing disaster. And if you look at every measure, no matter, all the initiatives, all the commissions, different governments, I'm not blaming it on any particular party or any particular government. Look at every measure on a Native reserve right now and try to tell me it's a success. Economic, no. Money, they're way down below everybody else in North America, way down in the toilet as far as economic goes. So it's an economic disaster. That's a given. Health, no. Masses of health issues. They've got a lower life expectancy than everybody else. Suicides are up. Diabetes is up. Cancer is up. Obesity is up. In health, it's a catastrophe. Crime? The crime rates are higher on every level on a reserve. Because, again, it's a mess. They're in trouble. I mean, and again, it's not, see, people misinterpret and they scream when people criticize that, oh, you're being a racist. You're saying, no. As I've said, any race is going to end up like that if you go stick them on these separated areas like that and make them dependent. You're going to make it a mess, a socio-economic disaster, and that's what we've got. Education, no, they are not becoming educated and getting out of that. There's some success stories. We can find them here and there, and we point at them, and we celebrate them, and we should. But, the success stories you see with First Nations people, almost always it means they had to escape the reserve. They had to get off there. Yet, there's no talk about getting rid of these bloody reserves. They're dead end. They're wrong. They're race-based policy, and they're wrong. No matter what the intention is, no matter how much money you pour at it, it's apartheid and it's wrong. And we have to at least acknowledge that before we start moving towards a solution. And we don't seem to be at that stage. Nobody's got the balls to come out and say these reserves are wrong. As Jonathan's pointing out, the only successful reserves are the ones that are self-sufficient from other either resource extraction or casinos, etc. Yes, and there's some that are well placed if they're near urban centers, they're near tourist areas. They can have a casino, they can have golf courses, wineries. There's some in the Okanagan that are doing quite well. There's some on the East Coast that have been doing okay. But again, those are exceptions among a low standard. They still have high rates of poverty, crime, domestic abuse, all sorts of issues on them. They're just doing better than the other reserves are. We need to work towards an end on them. And there's been a few discussions on how to get there. As I said, it can't happen overnight. I saw some online discussion that was pretty heavy about it. Oh, by the way, and somebody got upset with me. Oh, you're talking about this. You shouldn't be talking politics. We just heard this. This is a period of mourning. This is too early to talk about this right now. No, actually, right now is the exact time we need to be talking about this. We need to talk about it when the feelings are raw. We need to talk about it when we've just seen how horrible this system is, when we've seen just how badly treated these people have been, and let's see how we can get them out of it. So no, now is the time to talk. Not when things have calmed down, we've forgotten, and the government's offered a bunch more apologies and had some more ceremonies and thrown more money at it. We need to talk about now when we're horrified by seeing the outcome of this broken, sick system. And it's only going to get worse until we get this system out of there. We got to end race-based policy. So, I'm going to read something. This is from an article I wrote years ago, but I went back. Some people might be familiar with it. It's called the White Paper. Pierre Trudeau was the prime minister, and Jean Chrétien wrote it back in 1969, 52 years ago. They did realize the dead end of the system. And this is something where they were absolutely right. And unfortunately, due to opposition, they backed down on it. And they didn't follow through with this. Think of today, I'm going to read the White Paper and the language of it. Some of it's, out of date language, but, just mostly due to the term Indian. and the gender things. But otherwise, think of how it could still apply today. So this is a statement of the government of Canada on Indian policy, 1969, presented to Parliament by Jean Chrétien. He was the Minister of Indian Affairs at the time. It says, to be an Indian is to be a man with a man's needs and abilities. To be an Indian is also to be different, to speak different languages, draw different pictures, tell different tales, and to rely on a set of values developed in a different world. Canada is richer for its Indian content, although there have been times when diversity seemed of little value to many Canadians. But to be a Canadian Indian today is to be someone different in another way. It's to be someone apart in law, apart in provision of government services, and often apart in social contracts. To be an Indian is to lack power, the power to act as owner of your lands, the power to spend your own money, and too often the power to change your own condition. Not always, but too often to be an Indian is to be without a job, a good house, or running water, without knowledge, training, or technical skill, and above all, those feelings of dignity and self-confidence that a man must have if he is to walk with his head held high. All these conditions of the Indians and the product of history have nothing to do with their abilities and capacities. Indian relations with other Canadians began with special treatment by government, society, and special treatment has been the rule since the Europeans first settled in Canada. Special treatment has made of the Indians a community of disadvantaged people. Obviously, the course of history can't be changed. To be an Indian must be to be free to develop Indian cultures in an environment of legal, social, and economic equality with other Canadians. Now, I'll get on to where that solution went. But you read that and you look at the white paper, you look at that preamble, what Jean Chrétien read 52 years ago in Parliament. And he was absolutely right. The same issues were going on that long ago, more than a generation ago. They realized that this separation was hurting them. It was hurting their self-esteem. It was hurting them economically. It was hurting them physically. It was a dead-end path. And to say it respectfully, that you can maintain the culture, you can maintain the differences, but it's time to bring them in to society for us to be together because it's failing otherwise. We can respectfully undo or move away from what the original settlers and colonial system that gets this colonial talk that gets overused right now about things today. But that was the preamble and that was going in. So before they got to it, and then they said, here's, what they wanted to do. It says that step one, legislative and constitutional basis of discrimination be removed. That was the bottom line. End race-based policy. It has to end. 52 years ago, we figured it out. We still can't seem to do it today. We have to do it. We have to. Two, that there be a positive recognition by everyone of the unique contribution of Indian culture to Canadian life. Yes, it's a part of our whole collective being. Let's mix. Let's be citizens. Let's get together. This is modernizing, growing, evolving. And there can be a positive recognition of that. What you see, the residential schools, we're trying to exterminate it. That's the term genocide gets applied here and there, rightly, wrongly at times. If people put the word cultural in front of it, though, there's no doubt that's exactly what the residential schools were about. They were cultural genocide. They were trying to wipe out the differences and cultural unique aspects of every native in Canada. They're trying to wipe that out through generations of children, and it was sick and it was wrong. This statement says, let's positively recognize it and as a contribution to us, not a detriment. And again, 52 years ago, they're saying this. That services come through those channels and from the same government agencies for all Canadians, and that those who are furthest behind be helped most. So again, it's just saying we make it all Canadians and get rid of the race-based part of it. Number 5, that lawful obligations be recognized. So yeah, again, we're not talking about throwing people off of reserves, not talking about scrapping the treaties or the lands that were designated, still follow through with those lawful obligations, but we've got to get out of this race-based system. That control of Indian lands be transferred to Indian people. Yeah. And right now that isn't so. I mean, they've got self-government things, the efforts through the 90s, but they didn't quite work out. And again, there's no transfer of property. There's a great deal of things that natives can't do with their land that other people can. So it's not really fully their land. If you can't sell it, it's not yours. So you're just a renter or a squatter, even if you want to say it to the worst. But it's not their land if they don't have that ability to mortgage or rent or sell. So government would be prepared to take the following steps to create this framework. So here's the steps. Propose that the Parliament that the Indian Act be repealed and take such legislative steps as may be necessary to enable Indians to control Indian lands and acquire title to them. Yeah. So give them their land like any other person's land and, split it up, divide it up. It's not going to be easy. Who said it would be? It's sure not easy following the status quo either. But start moving on. Start going on to proper property rights and settling like everyone else. Propose to governments of the provinces that they take over the same responsibility for the Indians that they have with other citizens in their provinces. The takeover will be accompanied by the transfer to the province of federal funds normally provided for Indian programs, augmented as may be necessary. Yes, because First Nations people are under the umbrella of federal government. So a whole lot of things, while they're typically provincial services for everybody else, for First Nations, it comes through Indian Affairs or whatever it's called these days. It's a federal thing. So that, again, this is going back then and saying, just again, make them citizens like everybody else. Simple as that. Number 3, make substantial funds available for Indian economic development as an interim measure. So yeah, transitional money, but the goal is to be transitional. We got to be looking to an end, interim, not ongoing and ongoing and ongoing. And then number 4, wind up the part of Department of Indian Affairs and Northern Development, which deals with Indian affairs. The residual responsibilities of the federal government for programs in the field of Indian affairs would be transferred to other appropriate federal departments. This was a fantastic policy statement 52 years ago. And this, again, doesn't undo the damage of the past, the horrors, the residential schools. But we can start the end of the damage we're doing today with this same system, in a sense. There's no more residential school, but there's still apartheid, and that's what it is. It's racial apartheid. Why is this acceptable to people? We didn't accept it with South Africa, and it sure as hell didn't work out well there, did it? But we're accepting it here. 52 years ago, Chrétien and Trudeau realized this. They recognized this. They read that to the Parliament, and unfortunately, opposition to it shot it down. You know who knocked it down? Yeah, there was some degree of chiefs and others who were doing quite well with the system as it sits. And a lot were the ones, the term that isn't used enough, it's called the Indian industry. There's a giant sub-industry of people who do very, very well out of the status quo with the First Nations right now. Lawyers, bureaucrats, there's band managers, there's all sorts of parasites that do absolutely fantastic in the Indian industry. There's contractors. Why do you think we spend all this money and they still don't have clean running water on that land? Well, there's a number of reasons, but it's not for lack of resources. It's corruption, inefficiency. Those dollars went somewhere. Yeah. And there's some people, as I said, who do not want to see this industry change because they're making out great out of it. And they lobby very effectively. And they lobbied Trudeau and Chrétien, unfortunately, very effectively 52 years ago. And the white paper got scrapped and they didn't go ahead with it, which is really too bad. And they're all suffering for it today. The natives, people on First Nations lands. And people off of them too. When they leave the reserve, they're coming off of a terrible circumstance, a rough area. And we see quite often, urban dwelling First Nations peoples in a lot of trouble. They often end up on the streets. They end up in trouble. They have difficulties with the law. They haven't been well socially adjusted to come into this kind of culture and society. And then they have difficulties when they get here. Again, some do fantastic and it's great, but they're the exceptions. And we got to stop that. We got to stop it where the only ones who seem to be prospering are the exceptions. We got to make it the majority. And we've got to accept that this system is broken. It's not going, we can't fix it. As long as you have one law for one race and another law for another race, it's not going to function right. So let's start the conversation. We haven't even gotten there yet. People don't talk about it. They sweep it under the rug. As I said, that's why we're in so much shock today to hear about those bodies discovered on the residential school property. And now people are calling out and talking about searching in other residential school lands and seeing, yeah, there's going to be more. We know there'll be more. But we knew about this before. If you look now, some of the stories are coming up. Oh, yeah, by the way, back in 2001, there was some flooding in High River that exposed some coffins from a residential school down there that we didn't know about. Up by Red Deer, there's another Red Deer institutional school, and there was a bunch of bodies up there that they discovered more years ago that they've done some ceremonies to, I guess, reinter and recognize that they were down there. This isn't new. The only thing that's new with this is just the volume of them, the number of them. So we're going to find more. And it's going to be emotional. It's going to be tragic. Again, we're not talking about 200 years ago. Those children on there, they would have been the uncles and aunts of people who are living today. Brothers, sisters, cousins. These are only a couple generations away. So let's use this time, though, to start putting a critical eye to this system. Then let's actually look at it and realize that we've got to bring it to a stop. When people talk about defending the status quo with these reserves, I mean, I wish it was possible that we could make everybody go out and spend a week on an isolated reserve just once. I tell you, it would change people's views so dramatically, so quickly, to actually see it in person. Because nobody can spend a week on one of those isolated reserves and then come back without lying or really just having been blind somehow and say, yeah, I see a future there. I see something, because that's what I like to ask them. What do you see, say, 40 years from now on one of those reserves, for a million, or, Assumption, or there's no end to them. There's numbers of them. And even the ones that are down south that aren't as isolated, but they're still in a great deal of distress. What do you see? What industries do you see to bring them out of dependency? There's none, because quite often they're in an area where there's very little industry around. Or if there is an industry, unfortunately, the people have become so socially dysfunctional that they can't properly take a full part in it. The days of sustenance hunting and trapping and living, those are gone. Come on, these are human beings. They're people. I mean, they want to enjoy those aspects. They go out hunting on the weekends, things like that, but they still want to watch TV. They still want a heated house. The nomadic, romantic days of wandering the woods, living off the land are gone. They're gone for everybody. And we've got this straddling thing where we're trying to keep this artificial culture. I think a lot of it is almost like a hipster, do-gooder, feel-good zoo. They feel good because we've kept this population up there and we've saved their culture. No, you haven't. Go have a look. The culture is nothing like what it must have been 200 years ago. And why do we want it to be? Who wants to have a culture from 200 years ago? We can have aspects of it. We can recognize our cultures. We can respect them. We can celebrate them. But most of our stuff from 200 years ago is crap we don't want to do anymore, no matter what culture you are. So quit this absurd feeling that we can save this through a reserve system. It's ridiculous. It's insane. And it doesn't have to be in a reserve to maintain the good aspects of the culture. Do we have reserves for the Chinese community, the Indian community? They maintain their cultures fantastically. And they do it within their own community. But meanwhile, they're still integrated with society and modern society and moving ahead and doing very well. And we certainly mistreated our Asian communities very badly only 100 years ago as well, and less than that. So, they'd be in terrible distress if we'd taken reserves and kept them on them since then. So let's have that discussion. It's enough ranting on that. I'd had a guest canceled today, so short on guests to keep things running. And I figured it was a good subject to cover, though, and I wanted to go on at length because it frustrated me year after year working in the oil field and watching this and watching it get worse year after year and knowing it's going to get worse as time passes. So hopefully we'll find some politicians to start finding some courage to tear off that Band-Aid and work towards bringing an end to this archaic, sick system of race-based policy. I'm going to cut the show short today, though. Like I said, I was missing a guest. So I just wanted to go off on that. Let's have some other optimism going into the week. The weather's nice. The lockdowns are coming towards an end. It's like I was saying with Dave. Let's get out and enjoy ourselves. Find a park where city workers aren't watching you. Have a beer. You'll be able to go on a patio soon. You'll be able to have some business things soon. And maybe we're going to be in for a good year. We're coming out of a bad one. We're starting off with some bad news. But let's take the bad things and turn them into good ones. We not everything has to be negative. And as I said, now's the time to be talking about First Nations issues and with a critical eye, because you can't solve a problem until you admit that you have one in the first place. Getting back to my old addictions treatment cliches. Step one, the hardest one, is admitting you have a problem. Well, our problem is race-based policy. Until it ends, the problem is not going to go away. So let's get back to our sponsor, though, and getting back to individual rights, the CCFR, the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights, they are sponsoring our shows. They have been advertising with the Western Standard. They're working hard. So don't forget, nobody works harder for gun owners than the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights. The CCFR is suing the federal government right now on behalf of gun owners. So, I mean, they're using the courts. They're getting out there. These aren't guys who are just promoting our rights and such. They are getting active and getting out there and defending it. So become a member or donate to their legal fund. You can go to firearmrights.ca and click why join. So remember, that's firearmrights.ca and click why join. So tomorrow, Nathan Gita is going to be coming on from Prince George there with his show Mountain Standard Time between 10 and noon there. He's always got a lot of great stuff to talk about. And I suspect he may want to speak to the issue of this residential school disaster that's unfolding. Or it's not a disaster, it's unfolding. It's a revelation. You know, it happened already. And now we're starting to be forced to look at what society did in those schools and how wrong it is. But so be sure to tune in to Nathan. He covers a lot of interesting subjects and things and such. And then on Wednesday, we'll have the pipeline, and I'm going to be on that probably with Dave and Derek. We cover the news items of the week. And Friday, I will be back with a couple of guests for a full 2-hour show, and we will discuss some great things, I'm sure. So thank you all very much for joining me for this short show to end May, but kick off summer. And, well, you all have a good day. I'll see you on the next one.